balance, let us open up that container and make sure those poll books are we can look at the ballots. We physically can look at them. But in these urban areas, they're lazy and they're not taking this the civic right very seriously, or their duties very seriously. They take an oath when they do as a precinct inspector. They are not taking it seriously and have not for years. And the apathy toward the official duties here has become egregious, because once they decide not to balance that precinct, then it goes through and you have the hot mess that you had, where you have these canvassers, board of canvassers, 4 people that is supposed to amen that hot mess. Flint has never been able to balance. Never been able to balance, and there's touch points across where they have the ability to open that up, to do a quote honest open of the ballot itself, the container itself. If you're not able to open that container up, which after it leaves the counting board, you're not able to do it unless you get a court order or an audit. And no one has been brave enough to do it. 71% of Detroit cannot be recounted. We have nothing. And when we did a recount before, we saw some of the most egregious things when we looked through and did recounts before in Detroit. There's some things in there that should never have been in there. And that is what I'm telling you about when you're able to open up those ballot boxes. But it is not going to be at the Detroit canvasser level, and certainly not at the Michigan State Board of Canvasser level.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tice. Vice Chair Irwin, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Just a couple of questions for you
Sure.
that I'm going to ask you based on the fact that you've been around for a while. You've been an activist. You've been where you work for the Secretary of State's office. So that's why I'm going to ask you these things. I think my first question is, are you aware that there are audits done on past elections? And in any of your official or unofficial capacities, did you ever have the opportunity or cause to review those audits that looked into things like, dead voters and all that kind of stuff
Yes.
that we've done in the past?
Yes.
Okay. And did you find that the answers to those questions were that, in fact, these were clerical errors in previous audits that have been done by the Legislative Auditor General and been before this committee in the recent years?
So I've worked with Chris Thomas for years, and I've submitted some illegal stuff that I felt was illegal to them to investigate, and they were investigated. How they remedied it was not according to what I felt was necessary. There have been clerical errors, if you call it clerical. The law concerning your ability to be a precinct inspector, a poll worker, is that you have to have a sufficient clerical acumen in order to perform the duties, which means you should be able to read and write and add and subtract. And you should be able to perform the duties without any inhibitions. We know that there are over 500 precincts in Detroit, and many of the people who will come and get trained, some of them will not show up. But the ones that do show up, they are not given sufficient training on how to legally perform the duties that they have. However, if they are told that the challenger is the enemy, this person standing behind you is the enemy, and they have not been told that the person behind you must be protected, you will not be able to address some of the oversight, laziness, ignorance of the law, ignorance of the process, and lack of training. And so one of the ways that ballots are the election fraud occurs is when you have workers who are not properly trained. And that's where we are finding is lack of training. They're in a hurry. They're not sure what to do. But those clerical errors are mixed with clerical errors, but a lot of them are considered fraud. I would have referred all of them to the Attorney General if it were me. But Chris Thomas and others decided not to. They tried to remedy those things as best they can, but unless you put the full faith into the law and start prosecuting people, we will continue to see what we've been seeing. 71% of Detroit cannot be recounted. And I would not want to run on a Detroit city nothing at all. I would not want to run in the city of Detroit knowing that there have been, quote, clerical errors, that some of them are illegal. There are ballot curing problems. We have seen people walk into the clerk's office in Detroit with a stack of 75 ballots. Janice Winfrey is standing next. Ballots. If you don't compare the signatures, you toss the signature out. You don't compare the signatures, you're supposed to. It's in the law. We are not following the law, and we are not following it in every election. And the larger the jurisdiction, which are people of color, people who look like me, the more fraud that can be inserted into stealing an election. And that is a problem, and we need to stop it.
Okay, I almost am afraid to ask another question.
Ask the second question.
You've read the audits. You've seen them. We both read the audits.
They know me, so
yeah,
they know.
I know. I'm glad we both read the audits. I just
I'm
keep putting it out
passionate.
there that, in fact,
Yes,
it is
thank
part of Michigan election law that we
Yes.
have audits, and those audits have been done in recent elections, and they'll be done after this one as well. And, you know, I just want to put that out there. And then also, you know, one of the things
You're talking about
really
a
agree with you.
post-election.
That's
Yes,
right.
but
That's what the law says.
they're insufficient.
I appreciate your
They're
position.
insufficient for what the purpose is. I'm asking for a forensic audit of the election itself, looking for the fraud and illegal votes.
Yes, and I'm wondering why the Trump campaign didn't want to do a recount, which would have been the normal process.
Why,
But
why
let
would
me
you
ask my second
recount
question.
71% of the votes cannot be recounted?
You know what? That's a problem. I want to agree with
I'm
you
just
on
telling
that.
you,
I'm
why
trying to build
waste,
up to agreeing with you.
Why waste your money and time? It costs money to do a recount. Why waste your money when 71% of the votes that you need to look at physically cannot be even seen?
Okay.
That
And that builds up to my next
29%.
question.
I'm not paying $2 million or $4 million for 29% of the ballots that can be counted, because the rest of them cannot be counted.
That's one of the reasons why I voted against the changes to the recall law that made it so onerous and difficult for people who wanted to look into these issues.
Open up
However,
the ballots.
The
Yes, sir.
issue that you mentioned, and I just want to highlight for the committee, because I really agree with you on this, is that, you know, when you have a situation where there's a discrepancy at that precinct, those precincts should be recountable. And we need to find a way to make that so. And I think that what you're going to find here in Lansing is that there are a whole lot of Democrats who are going to agree with that. We want these ballots to be looked at. We want elections to be run in a safe and secure manner. But the problem is that this legislature has been controlled by Republicans since the 80s. The state Senate has been controlled by the Republicans since the 80s. And so my question to you is, after the 2016 election, when we saw the problems that we saw that you just hinted at, when we had agreement apparently between a lot of folks about the fact that these precincts should be recountable, why did we see no changes in the law to address any of these issues while we had a Republican governor, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate?
So I'd be happy to answer that question, and that's a very simple one. We have sufficient laws on the books. So my brothers and sisters in the Republican GOP has done their due diligence to pass laws, make laws. The enforceability of the laws, however, because in Grand Traverse County, we're not having this problem. In certain counties, that Van Buren County, we're not having this hot mess problems that we have in Pontiac and in Flint and in Detroit. We don't have that. So if you want Republicans to pass more laws, why don't the Democrats in their cities enforce the doggone election laws so that we can have fair and just elections? Because I just gave you the law. It's a felony for me to give my friend, next door neighbor, my ballot. It's a misdemeanor for me to give it to them, and it's a felony for them to turn it in. A felony. It is not enforced. And we have situations in the inner cities and these Democrat-controlled areas, because that's what we're talking about. Democrat-controlled areas cannot seem to balance their elections. And because they have been habitual violators of the inability to balance their election because of either ignorance, apathy, lack of leadership, or lack of caring about their election integrity, because if you add more laws to the books, you still have people who will not follow the law, and if you don't enforce the law, if you don't bring in Republicans to say, I am going to be a poll worker, if you need 5 Republicans in the building, make sure 5 workers are. Contact the Michigan Republican Party. Ask them for 5 people or 25 people or 200 people to work it. And then when the challengers come in, you protect them. You don't put them out. You don't call the police on them. You're supposed to protect them according to the law. If you follow the law in the urban Democratic controlled areas, then we would not be here today. I certainly wouldn't be here. But in 25 years that I've been monitoring elections, working with the Secretary of State, the last 8 doing election integrity, it's been a hot mess in the same Democrat-controlled areas. We don't need any more laws. We need to enforce the laws, and we need to open up the doggone ballot boxes.
But we are agreed that we need to change the laws on
Thank
recounting
you.
precincts. We do
Thank
agree
you.
that we need to change the law on recounting precincts, right?
Pardon me?
We should change the law on recounting precincts. That was the
We're
subject of my
not- we're
question.
not changing the
You went
laws
on a
for
nice political
recounting.
screed, but the
No,
question
no.
was about that specific law, allowing the recounting of imbalanced precincts.
No, we're not.
Let's change that law.
We're not trying to talk about recounting for imbalanced precinct. The balancing of the precinct can come at the counting board level. You think that the ballots come out and then all of a sudden it's given in and locked up in a box. It is not. Once it leaves the precinct, it goes to a counting board. They have the full authority to open up that ballot box because it's not balancing. If the seal is broken, if this is broken, they can reseal it at the counting board. There is a law with the counting board, and it's lazy in the inner cities of color, of people who look like me are not doing their job. And it needs to be done so that we can count 100% of the precincts instead of 29%. That's what needs to be done, is to make sure people are doing their job. You won't get that in an audit. What you will get in the current fake audits that we've been having and these fluff audits that we've had right now, you will get, well, these can't be recounted, so okay, so we can't do that. Here's what we can. You will get an audit of the 29% in Detroit that can be recounted. That's all you're going to get. Because we need to see the 71% of the fraud that has been locked up and will be destroyed after so many years. That's what we need to see.
Thank you,
I'll take
Senator.
any other questions.
Thank you, Senator Irwin. Senator Lucido.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Tarver. I got to tell you, I can't agree with you more. My whole problem is sitting in this chair today and leaving the Senate to go prosecute those crimes. Why was it when the Secretary of State, which you were there how many years?
I've been with the Secretary of State 29 years.
Almost 30 years. We've been in this room here over 6.5 hours, and the irony is it's about the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
If the people are doing their jobs and the integrity of the vote is being respected, we wouldn't be in here today.
That's right.
2 is 71% can't be counted because
Of fraud or apathy or incompetence or clerical error or all of the above.
So we did some testimony, and the chairman was gracious enough to bring in 3 separate identifiable clerks from 3 separate identifiable counties. We asked these questions. How many of the ballots weren't signed that you didn't count? How many didn't look like signatures? I mean, we went into the deep dive because there's so many people that are so disenchanted. I don't want them to give up on the vote. I want them to remember that people sacrificed their lives for these amendments.
People who look like me died to get the right to vote. And I'm telling you, it is sacred.
And this discriminatory practices with women not getting the same right that men years ago. If it's a felony, it's a felony.
Mm-hmm.
If it's got to be prosecuted, it should be. Otherwise, the whole fabric of this entire nation falls apart. Discrepancies in the precincts, I get it, to my colleague up here. If you're going to have discrepancies, as if it's an easy fix. But I'm not hearing things from all over the state. I'm hearing them in segregated areas, and I think You are targeting these areas by saying people are either inept to do their job or they don't care about doing the job.
They have either been instructed not to care or have been allowed to, over the decades, not to be held accountable for the lack of accountability in the sacred vote. When you have gone so many years, people do not want to be called racist.
Right.
And if you're going into urban areas, in particular Detroit, you're hearing, why are you trying to disenfranchise the black vote?
Yeah.
You are racist, racist, racist.
I think this, and I
But that has been the mantra to allow for the 71% of no accountability when we have safeguards in place to ensure the balancing of the precinct and the seal that is not broken.
Dr. Tarver, those ballots are not of color.
I agree.
They are one color.
That's right.
And they go in and they have parties on them. And the disrespect that I've heard throughout the process in Wayne County, in Detroit, only leads me to believe that even an audit process, and I got to ask this question, if 71% can't be counted,
Cannot.
the audit process to spend the kind of millions of dollars that it would take, and I really don't even know what CPA firm or what firm would do an audit. Have you, in your almost 30 years with the Secretary of State, could you identify a firm that specializes in election audits?
We'd have to bring in the federal government. The forensic audit that is needed
Yep.
is not going to be what has been done in order to open up those ballot boxes, which we need to.
So
That's where we need to open up the ballot boxes.
if this has never been done, if this has never been done in the history of this country, I'm asking this question. Does the legislature cumulatively or collaboratively work on a standard that would be the audit process? Because the next thing I see is that there's going to be debate over the audit process.
I don't see the legislative body, this body, passing any law to change anything, because must balance is not going to force Detroit to balance. Must balance is not going to force Inez Brown, the city clerk of Flint, to balance. Must balance. She has never been able to balance since she's been an election clerk there. So she's never balanced. Pontiac won't balance. There's a few other places, mostly urban areas, that will not balance. And they don't have to be as large as Detroit. They just won't balance. And if we don't have a mechanism in place, because once you pass a law that says we're going to do this, it is not going to be heeded, because then if you try to enforce it in the urban areas, you'll be considered a racist. You'll be considered disenfranchising the voters. You're just trying to check on us. Oh, black folks from Detroit need to have our whatever 71%. If you can't count it, you can't count it. And this Secretary of State will call it small clerical errors. And that is the mantra and talking points that should not be done. This is not a small clerical error. If there is fraud in those 71%, they need to be opened. Open the boxes. And that's going to be the new mantra, hashtag open the boxes.
Mr. Chair, I just have we're going to get down and drill down on this, but the reality is I don't think my colleagues on the opposite side of the aisle feel any differently. I think, to Senator Irwin's point, all of us want the integrity, the respect, and trust. Otherwise, we sitting here as lawmakers make no sense if the vote doesn't count and it doesn't accurately reflect what's going on. But
That was certainly the sentiment expressed at our joint committee's first meetings by all members.
and at the end of the day, though, if we don't have the capability of resurrecting this wrong to accurately reflect what the vote is, how did it get so disenfranchised that we all are sitting here today hearing ballots brought in at 4 a.m? I must have heard it 20 times, maybe more. Ballots that were going through and counted 8 times. Ballots that weren't signed going through, or the signature appeared, or the date, 1900.
Oh, yeah. The constitutional issue and the constitutional issue that the president is arguing, which is a valid one, is that the equal protection under the law, it's required under the Constitution. And this is the president's argument. Me in Lansing, Michigan, if I sent in my absentee ballot, I didn't sign it, or I voted straight Republican and straight Democrat, my partisan section should be spoiled because they should not be curing it. And that is being cured. If I did not do what I needed to do, my ballot won't count. But if the same ballot was sent in Detroit, it is cured, which is fake, trying to interpret the results, and it is accepted if I don't sign it in Detroit. And that's where in Lansing, my ballot won't count. In Detroit, it will, and I should be able to have equal protection under the law. That is the constitutional amendment. That's the constitutional argument that our president is making. That is what you should be looking at. Are we treated fairly, regardless of where we live in Michigan? Will my vote count, regardless?
You used the word cure.
Cure.
And in the law,
yes.
If you look at the legal definition of cure, what do you mean by the definition of cure?
So the curing of the ballots is if you're not able to, you've got an absentee ballot and it is kicked out. Because if you're sitting there, your ballot is kicked out if there's an overvote or if there's an undervote. You can, if there's an overvote, let's say it says vote for not more than 2 and you vote for 3. It's an overvote. It'll kick it back out if you're at the precinct.
And you have a chance to cure
And you
the
have a
ballot.
chance to cure your own ballot.
To redress the wrong
Correct.
on the ballot.
But if it's an absentee ballot,
Yes.
it is not supposed to be cured.
It is not supposed
No.
to be. It's supposed
Your
to be.
partisan
It's a spoiled
section,
ballot.
That section is spoiled. It's not countable. But the nonpartisan section that you did correctly is supposed to be counted.
So let's go by example. I vote straight ticket, Democratic.
And Republican.
Or I vote straight ticket, but when I get to the judges, choose not but want 1 because they're nonpartisan.
Right.
That part.
Right.
I choose 2. Mm-hmm. What happens to the ballot?
So your ballot counts, but if it's an absentee, that particular judge is not, it's not counted.
Nobody gets a vote.
Correct.
Okay. At the end of the day, I sat here as a legislator for over 6 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I sit in this chair and I wonder why the Secretary of State, if you have to request a ballot in a primary for Democrat or Republican, why they just can't make 2 ballots, all Republican, all Democrat, and send them out. So it can't get spoiled. You can't make a mistake. You can't go across the center line.
That is what occurs during the primary. So each group, Republicans and Democrats, decide who's going to be on their ballot.
But if you don't want the ballot to be spoiled and not counted, and you want your vote to count, and
you can split your ticket in the general.
But I'm
Correct.
saying in the primary, do you see why, if I'm asking for a Democratic or Republican?
No, I would agree with you. I would
Because
agree
now
with
it's an
you.
impossibility to spoil that ballot.
That's only in the primary.
Primary, right. But that brings the next level of seekers to move to the general. And if the ballot was spoiled enough times, that seeker may not get the opportunity to serve.
I agree.
Okay, one more thing, and then I'm going to call it because
I hope
know
so.
it's been. No, but you know what? I'm tired of sitting here and trying to defend
I'm just giving you a hard time, Mr. Vice Chair.
Just go ahead. Give him all the time he wants here.
71% not being able to be counted, which means
71% not being able to be recounted.
Which means, do we ever get the opportunity to find out what the hell happened?
You will never know what is actually in that box, in the ballot box. You're not able to determine if those who are, those ballots are even duplicated in.
Do you
If you see
believe-
people sending in 3 or 4
I got it.
times,
I
you don't
understand.
know.
So that statement of 71% has been stated out in the public. You are aware, being with the Secretary of State's office, 29 years, that's a long time. At the end of the day, does this give rise for the Attorney General to make an investigation and inquiry why 71% of that vote went that way?
Yes, I would believe that, again, if there is impropriety, that is where the Attorney General can investigate. I've prepared referrals to Bill Schuette for election crimes. We've had people in Michigan prosecuted for voting in Michigan and at their summer home in Florida. We've had people who were not here legally, non-citizens, vote in Michigan. We've had tons of people who voted twice, voted in person and absentee, and they're doing it in large clusters in these urban areas. It is a problem in the Democrat-controlled areas. It's not the problem with the laws on the books. It's a problem in the Democrat-controlled areas, and the laws need to be enforced. And if they cannot be enforced, they need to at least bring in the federal government to do an oversight and administer elections in these urban areas, which have been routinely unable to be balancing at the end of the day. We have too many touch points where those things can be balanced, but we have an apathy or just a corrupt, either apathy or a corrupt system. And for some reason, we have no appetite with this governor, Secretary of State, or the Attorney General to do anything about it at this point. This is too egregious and too much fraud that it should have been already investigated.
We have seen prosecutions in election fraud, such as Southfield. Mm-hmm. There is selective prosecution in certain areas. At the end of the day, why wouldn't this state want the ability to make the inquiry? Is it because the case isn't delivered perfectly? I mean, these are credible people that are testifying here, including yourself.
It is COVID, before COVID, and even with COVID. COVID does not change the law. The law was not changed to accommodate COVID. The people who are the challengers are required and need to be protected in order to see the process. They can challenge the voter, they can challenge the precinct inspector, and they can challenge the entire process. That's what the law says, 168.733. That's what the law says. But we also have laws on the books that allow for people, the public, to view. And we also have laws on the books, but if they're not going to be enforced because it's an urban area, we have laws that says that people who should need assistance should be able to have assistance in voting. And some of these precincts did not have handicap and disability procedures there. Voting by mail disenfranchises a lot of people who cannot read and write, who need assistance, who need some assistance in the voting process with the machines that will read the ballot to them. And so this is the problem where we're not allowing, we've used as an excuse COVID, but we are not allowing what needs to be done to be done. Just like the children who are not in school with disabilities are not getting the special care that they need, neither did the voters here in Michigan. They did not get the special assistance that is required by law. These special assistance, even those people who are blind, people who need Braille, people who need special audio equipment, we have those at every precinct, or it should be at every precinct, so that the people of Michigan will have everything they need to vote, and that is not being done in the urban areas. And people don't want to touch Detroit, but it is not a sacred cow anymore. It is looking more like a cow, but not a sacred cow anymore.